All right, so today we are going to be talking about analyzing primary source documents. And obviously, this is for American Studies, even though it says United States History 1. Obviously, it's applicable to both classes, so bear with me. All right, so the first question is always, what is a primary source, right? Before we can discuss analyzing it, let's just define what it is really quickly. On the slide here, you can see a lot of different examples. The reason why I'm kind of showing you all these examples is to give you a comprehensive view of what a primary source can be. I don't want you to think it's only letters and diaries and written things. It can be very visual. It doesn't even have to be a piece of art. It can also be, just something that of everyday use in the 17th century or the 18th century. So, like, if you look down at physical material, it could be things that people touched and had and use on a daily basis. Political cartoons do a lot, for example, to show how people were thinking about political ideas, or propaganda posters, like the one on the upper left-hand corner here, show ways in which the government tried to get people to get involved when there was conflict. And of course, as we go forward and get closer to current day, we start to see the advent of photography, and you're going to definitely see that a lot at the end of this course, even though we're not quite there yet. We're still in the 1700s. You'll see people as they actually were in photos, and also too, like, always be aware that there is all kinds of sources, including auditory. For example, recorded speeches, and obviously we don't have recorded speeches of, say, George Washington, because there was nothing to record it with, but we do have their speeches oftentimes written down. And also popular culture. The music you listen to is a window into what you're thinking and what moves you. Bob Dylan, for example, as shown here in the bottom right hand corner, wrote a lot of music about the Vietnam War, about the civil strife going on in the 60s and 70s, and listening to his music is a primary source. You do get a sense of what people were thinking about and talking about and what moved people during that time period, because you know what? Even though Bob Dylan was only one guy writing from his point of view, there are a lot of people who bought his records, there are a lot of people who listened to him, and there was a reason for that. And that is a clue as to what people were thinking about during that time. All right, so then the following question would be, why is it important to analyze primary source documents? What exactly do we get out of it? From just a student perspective, I just kind of want to stress, it really teaches you critical reading skills. The ability to read something and have to judge whether it was, biased or not. Like, whether we can trust the source. How much of the source is accurate, how many more sources do we need to get a fuller picture. The ability to read something and not necessarily trust it, or have to make a determination of how much we should trust it, is something you're always going to have to do, not just in history, not just in English, but also when looking over legal documents, when you buy a house someday, or when you get an email from somebody that sounds a little shady. That critical reading skill really does play a part in figuring out whether you're getting conned or whether someone's lying to you, and things like that. And so every time you look at a source, you can't trust it as being the absolute truth. You do have to kind of look at it with a skeptical eye. And I think that analyzing primary source documents, no matter what time period, really teaches you how to do that. Analytical skills is also something, part of looking at primary source documents, part of doing history, is detective work. And if you look at primary source as a clue, like a small part of a larger tapestry, finding out how the puzzle pieces fit really is a good skill to have. And it's that level of analysis, looking at something and knowing this has significance to a larger whole, and I need to know that, and I also need to explain it. And that's what analysis is, being able to explain the significance of something. And just basically being able to judge for yourself. So much of what you're told is filtered through so many people that oftentimes we lose sight of the fact that sometimes we just want to double check something on our own, and judging for yourself is super important. All right, so the first thing you want to do is, have a reason for analyzing a primary source document. And usually that means you're going to start off with a question. If sources are clues to a mystery, right? If you think about it from that perspective, you need to know what the question is, what is the mystery or the riddle you're trying to solve, and that's what a leading question is. So I might ask like a broad question as to why did the English colonize the New World, and I might give you a source that may be like a window into why they did that. It will be like a clue. Now it breaks down into a couple parts. The method that we're going to use is called SOAPs, and it basically breaks down into source, which I'll talk about each part individually. But source, occasion, audience, purpose, and then sources, which is plural. It's different than the singular, and I'll explain that when we get there. A source is basically asking you, what type of document is this? Is it a movie? Is it a speech? Is it a song? Is it a physical item? Is it a diary entry? Or is it a law? All these things matter in determining its significance. Who is the author? So, for example, who is saying this? And what do we know about them? Maybe we don't know anything at all, but maybe we know a lot, and maybe what we know about them can help us form an opinion about the primary source. Yeah. So then the occasion is like, what is the setting, the time, the place? So, for example, writing about the British government in 1771 is much different than writing about the British government in 1776 if you're an American, because your attitude about the British government evolved quite a bit between those events. A lot of events transpired between 1771 and 1776. At a certain point, you're a loyal British subject, and by 1776, you're an independent. So, whether you're talking about the British government before independence or after independence really does make a difference. So knowing the time of something is important, and you do need to pay attention to that, because oftentimes the time period is a clue, and not just time period. I mean, I'm talking like year. So it is important to know that. You should also know, is this being recorded long after an event? So for example, John Smith, a lot of stuff happened to him in Jamestown, but then he waited until he came back to England to write about it. And you have to kind of question, okay, so how much of it did he remember or misremember, or how much of it is he kind of embellishing, etc. And then it's, who is the intended audience? Who exactly is this intended for? And the example that I always use when talking about why this is important is your own perspective. When you go out at night to hang out with your friends, you are going to answer the question, what did you do last night, much differently if the question is posed by your friends or if your question is posed by your parents. The way you talk to your parents is never going to be the same as the way you talk to your friends, unless you have a crazy relationship with them. And the reason is because they are different audiences. They expect different things from you. You expect different things from them. And therefore, you're going to tailor your answer. Even if you're telling the truth in both instances, you're going to emphasize and you're going to tailor your answer in different ways for different people. And that's why knowing who someone's talking to, you can guess why they're saying things, why they're emphasizing some things, why they're leaving some things out, why they are talking in a specific way, whether they're being informal or not. For example, George W. Bush used to always talk to people in kind of a deep Southern accent when he was on the campaign trail, because he was trying to sound down home and just one of the people. But then when he was president of the United States, he spoke very differently. And there are a lot of presidents who did similar things. And so his audience dictated how he acted, and knowing who he's talking to would determine what his behavior is. So audience is important. And of course, once you get through the source, the occasion, and the audience, it's really kind of easy to figure out what the purpose is. All those things lead to this, knowing, what is the purpose of this primary source? How do clues derived from knowing the source, occasion, audience help us understand the purpose? And how does the purpose help us determine the bias present in the document? If you're running for president of the United States, and that is the purpose of you saying something, you may not be telling the truth. But if you're a journalist and you're just writing to reveal the facts, that may have more weight. So knowing the purpose of something, knowing what you're trying to get out of something, will help you determine the bias and help you understand the significance. Now, the last one is sources, with plural. And this is an interesting one because this will help you with jumping to the next thing for research. So, for example, when you're done looking at a source and determining its purpose and also determining its significance, the next series of questions you have to ask are important. So are there other sources to support this source? So for example, if you are looking at a primary source document about the Declaration of Independence and you get Ben Franklin's perspective on the Declaration, you have to ask yourself the question, are there other perspectives I could be looking at to get a bigger picture, a fuller picture of what's going on? Are there sources that disagree with this? So, to keep using that example, are there people who disagreed with the Declaration of Independence? Maybe I should find a counterpoint to give myself a fuller sense of what was going on. And that's going to be very important down the road when you start doing research. You're going to have to start posing those questions to yourself. What else could I find? What else is there out there? Is there a different perspective than this? Are there other people I can look at who saw the same thing but maybe in a different way? And sources is an important one for jumping to the next one, figuring out where to go from there. And that's something you're going to have to pay attention to quite a bit. So, based on the information you get from all of this, hopefully you can answer any question that is posed to you, or hopefully that you're posing to yourself because you're kind of imaginative and you have all these curiosity questions.